Eleanor Reeves sat at her large glass desk on the 40th floor of the Horizon Tower. The view of the city spread out below her like a map. As the Chief Operations Officer of TechVision Enterprises, she had worked 15 years to reach this position. Her office had the best furniture, her wardrobe came from designer stores, and people jumped when she spoke. At 48 years old, Eleanor had everything she thought meant success. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Eleanor arrived in her black luxury car, nodded to the security guard who quickly opened the door for her, and rode the private elevator to the executive floor. Her assistant handed her a coffee made exactly how she liked it. "The meeting starts in 10 minutes, Ms. Reeves," her assistant said. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review." Eleanor thanked her and walked toward the conference room. As she approached, she heard voices from the break room. She normally would have continued walking, but something made her stop. "It was awful," a young woman's voice said. "The man kept pressing against me on the bus, even though there were empty seats. When I asked him to move, he called me names." "That happens to me all the time," another voice added. "And no one ever helps." "That's because you're not wearing expensive clothes or looking important." A third voice said. "I bet Ms. Reeves never deals with that kind of treatment." Eleanor stepped away quietly, feeling something uncomfortable in her chest. Was it true? Did people really get treated so differently based on how they looked or dressed? She had taken public transportation years ago, before her success, but she couldn't remember experiencing anything like what her employees described. During the meeting, Eleanor couldn't focus. The financial reports, normally so interesting to her, seemed far away. She kept thinking about those conversations. Had her position and wealth created a bubble around her? Did she really understand what most people experienced every day? That evening, Eleanor canceled her dinner plans and sat alone in her luxury apartment. She opened her laptop and began searching for information about social bias and public transportation. The stories she found shocked her. Article after article described how people were treated differently based on their appearance, gender, age, and perceived social status. "I don't know if this is true," she said to herself. "These could just be isolated incidents blown out of proportion." Then an idea formed in her mind. There was one way to find out the truth. She could experience it herself. Eleanor began making notes. She would need to change her appearance completely. No designer clothes, no expensive jewelry, no perfect hair or makeup. She would need to change how she spoke, how she carried herself, even how she looked at people. For 2 weeks, she would become someone else, someone ordinary, and take the bus every day. "This is crazy," she told herself. "I have meetings scheduled. I have responsibilities." But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was important. Maybe more important than anything she had done in years. Eleanor reached for her phone and called her assistant. "Cancel my external meetings for the next 2 weeks," she said. "Tell everyone I'm working on a special project." "May I ask what project, Ms. Reeves?" her assistant asked, sounding surprised. Eleanor looked out at the city lights below her window. Somewhere down there, thousands of people were having completely different experiences than hers. "Research," she said simply. "Very important research." As she hung up the phone, Eleanor felt both nervous and excited. For the first time in years, she was stepping into unknown territory. She had no idea what she would discover, but she knew it might change everything. The next morning, Eleanor woke up earlier than usual. Instead of her normal routine of checking emails and making calls, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the clothes she had bought late last night at a discount store across town. Plain jeans with a small tear near the pocket, a faded blue t-shirt that was one size too big, a worn jacket that had probably belonged to someone else before reaching the store rack, shoes that pinched her toes but cost less than the coffee she usually ordered. "This is how I start," she whispered to herself. Eleanor called Martha, a makeup artist who had helped her prepare for company photos and important events for years. "I need your help with something unusual," Eleanor explained when Martha arrived. "I need to look ordinary, maybe even a bit tired and worn down." Martha raised her eyebrows but asked no questions. Professional to the core, she began working on Eleanor's transformation. "No expensive-looking makeup," Eleanor instructed. "Think of someone who buys everything from the drugstore and applies it quickly each morning." 2 hours later, Eleanor barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her normally perfect blonde hair was now a flat brown, pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face looked plain, with just enough makeup to cover her expensive skincare routine, but not enough to look polished. Martha had even added subtle touches that made Eleanor look like she hadn't slept well. "This is perfect," Eleanor said, studying her reflection, "but there's something else missing." Martha watched as Eleanor practiced changing her posture. The straight-backed confidence of a CEO disappeared, replaced by slightly hunched shoulders. The direct gaze became more hesitant, glancing down more often. "It's not just about looks," Eleanor explained. "It's how you carry yourself, how you take up space in the world." Eleanor practiced walking across the room. As a powerful executive, she moved like she owned every inch of space around her. Now she made herself smaller, stepping aside, her arms closer to her body. She changed her voice next. The clear, commanding tone she used in boardrooms became softer, less certain. She practiced adding sorry and excuse me to sentences where she would never have apologized before. "Remarkable," Martha said when they had finished. "I wouldn't recognize you on the street." "That's exactly what I need," Eleanor replied. Before Martha left, Eleanor made her promise to tell no one about this project. Then she carefully wrote down her observations about how different she already felt in these new clothes, with this new appearance. "It's strange," she wrote in her journal. "I already feel less powerful, less important, just by changing how I look." Is this how people feel every day when they don't have the armor of expensive clothes and a prestigious title? At 9 o'clock, Eleanor left her building through the service entrance to avoid the doorman who would have recognized her even in disguise. She walked 6 blocks away from her usual routes before finding a bus stop. 5 people already waited there. No one looked at her twice. No one offered a polite smile or nod as people often did when they recognized someone important. She was completely invisible. When the bus arrived, Eleanor took a deep breath. She fumbled with her change, not used to paying in cash instead of using the private car service that usually took her everywhere. "Move it, lady," a man behind her grumbled. "Some of us have places to be." Eleanor mumbled an apology and hurried onto the bus. Finding a seat near the back, she looked around at her fellow passengers. This was her world now, at least for the next 2 weeks. The bus pulled away from the curb, carrying Eleanor Reeves, powerful executive, into her new life as just another face in the crowd. Her experiment had officially begun. Eleanor's first 3 days on the bus taught her more than 15 years in the executive suite. The morning rush hour became her classroom, and every rider became her teacher, though none knew they were part of her experiment. On the first day, Eleanor stood because all seats were taken. She noticed a pattern immediately. Men in business suits spread their legs wide, taking up 1.5 seats. Women kept their knees together, bags on their laps, making themselves smaller. "Excuse me," Eleanor said to a middle-aged man in a suit similar to one she owned. "Could you move your briefcase so I can sit?" The man looked up from his phone, eyes moving over her discount store clothes. He sighed loudly, moved his leather briefcase an inch, and returned to his screen without a word. Eleanor squeezed into the small space, feeling the hard plastic edge of the seat dig into her thigh because the man didn't move his leg. This would never happen in her normal life, where people jumped to accommodate her needs. By the third morning, Eleanor had established a routine. She took the 7:15 bus, traveled across town for 45 minutes, then switched to another bus going in a different direction. She spent several hours in public spaces, parks, libraries, coffee shops, before taking the afternoon buses back. On buses, she became a careful watcher. She noticed how drivers greeted some passengers warmly while barely looking at others. She saw how elderly people sometimes stood while teenagers sprawled across seats with their backpacks. "I'd never noticed any of this before," she wrote in her journal each night. "How could I have missed it?" On the afternoon of the third day, something happened that shook Eleanor deeply. The bus was crowded, and she stood holding a pole near the back door. A group of young men in expensive sports clothes got on, laughing loudly. One pointed at a woman nearby. "Check out the bag, lady," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet she hasn't showered in days." The woman he pointed at was older, perhaps 60, with clean but very worn clothes. She carried several plastic bags. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor as the young men continued making jokes. Eleanor waited for someone to speak up. The bus driver said nothing. Other passengers looked away or pretended to be absorbed in their phones. The woman's face showed no reaction, as if she had heard such comments many times before. Eleanor felt her CEO personality rising up. She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped herself. This was not about her stepping in as a powerful savior. This was about understanding what happened every day when no powerful person was around. With a sick feeling in her stomach, Eleanor stayed silent too. The young men eventually got off the bus, still laughing. The older woman continued sitting quietly, her face a mask. When the woman got off at the next stop, Eleanor followed her. Away from the bus, Eleanor approached carefully. "I'm sorry about those men on the bus," she said. The woman looked surprised that someone was speaking to her. "Oh, that?" The woman shrugged. "That happens most days. You get used to it." "You shouldn't have to get used to it," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than her disguise called for. The woman looked at her curiously. "You new to the bus? You sound different." Eleanor quickly softened her tone. "Just new to this route." "Well, piece of advice," the woman said. "Make yourself invisible. It's safer that way." As the woman walked away, Eleanor stood frozen on the sidewalk. Make yourself invisible. The opposite of everything she had worked for in her career. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The woman's words kept repeating in her mind. How many people lived their lives trying to be invisible just to avoid harassment? And what happened to those who couldn't or wouldn't hide? With these troubling thoughts, Eleanor prepared for day 4 of her experiment, not knowing it would be the day everything changed. Day 4 started with rain. Eleanor stood at the bus stop without an umbrella, letting the water soak through her cheap jacket. Around her, people huddled under colorful umbrellas or newspaper sheets. A businessman in an expensive raincoat stood far from the others, checking his watch every few seconds. The bus arrived 15 minutes late. People pushed forward, eager to escape the rain. Eleanor waited her turn, noticing how the businessman moved to the front of the line without anyone stopping him. The bus driver nodded at him with respect while barely glancing at the others. By now, Eleanor recognized some regular passengers. There was the young mother with twins who always looked tired, the old man with a cane who read paperback novels, the teenager with headphones who drew in a sketchbook. In just 3 days, she had begun to see patterns in their lives that she had never noticed from her executive position. Today, she spotted someone new, a young woman in her 20s wearing a neat office outfit. She sat near the front, looking nervous, perhaps on her way to a job interview or her first week of work. Eleanor took a seat in the middle of the bus. The ride was bumpy, and she wrote notes in her small notebook about what she observed. 20 minutes into the journey, a man got on at a downtown stop. He wore jeans and a leather jacket. Something about how he scanned the bus made Eleanor uncomfortable. The man moved down the aisle and stopped beside the young woman in the office clothes. He sat next to her, though there were empty seats available. "Hey, beautiful," he said loudly. "Where are you headed looking so nice?" The young woman shifted closer to the window and mumbled something Eleanor couldn't hear. She kept her eyes down. "Don't be like that," the man continued, moving closer. "I'm just being friendly. What's your name?" The woman shook her head slightly. "I'd rather just ride quietly, please." "Come on, don't be cold," he insisted, touching her arm. "I'm trying to give you a compliment." The young woman looked around desperately, but other passengers stared out windows or at their phones. The bus driver kept his eyes on the road. Eleanor felt her heart beating faster. For 3 days, she had been observing, learning what it was like to be powerless and invisible. But now someone needed help. The CDO voice in her head spoke clearly. "You have power whether you're wearing designer clothes or not. Use it." Eleanor stood up and walked forward, holding the rail as the bus swayed. She stopped beside their seat. "She asked you to leave her alone," Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. Gone was the hesitant tone she had practiced. This was her boardroom voice, the one that made executives listen. The man looked up, surprised. "Mind your own business, lady." "This is my business," Eleanor replied. "And everyone else's too." She looked around the bus, making eye contact with other passengers. A few straightened in their seats. "Whatever," the man muttered. "Bunch of stuck-up." "The next stop is mine," the young woman interrupted, standing quickly. Though it clearly wasn't her stop, she moved toward the door. Eleanor followed her. They got off together at the next stop. leaving the man on the bus. "Thank you," the young woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "That happens at least once a week, but no one ever says anything." "Does it always end okay?" Eleanor asked. "Usually. Sometimes they follow me off the bus." She hugged her folder against her chest. "I'm Lisa. I just started a job downtown." "I'm Eleanor," she replied, forgetting for a moment that she was supposed to be using a fake name. "You sounded different back there," Lisa observed. "Like my boss when she's handling a difficult situation." Eleanor smiled slightly. "I was just doing what anyone should do." "But they don't," Lisa said simply. "That's the problem." As they waited for the next bus, Eleanor realized her experiment had shifted. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was part of this world now, and staying silent was no longer an option. After the incident with Lisa, Eleanor began to see the bus differently. It wasn't just a place to observe social bias anymore. It was a small community where people's lives connected briefly each day. She started recognizing the same faces and noticing their routines. On day 6 of her experiment, Eleanor sat next to a woman who looked about 35. She carried a large bag with a hospital logo and wore light blue scrubs under her coat. "Long shift?" Eleanor asked, remembering how Lisa had thanked her for speaking up. The woman looked surprised that someone was talking to her. 12 hours, she replied with a tired smile. "I'm Marisol." "I'm Ellie," Eleanor said, using the shorter name she had started giving as part of her disguise. Marisol worked as a hospital cleaner, Eleanor learned. She worked 3 jobs to support her family: hospital cleaning during the day, office cleaning at night, and elder care on weekends. "How do you manage it all?" Eleanor asked. Marisol shrugged. "You do what you have to do for family. My son is smart. He might get a scholarship for college next year." Over the next few days, Eleanor and Marisol rode together often. Marisol shared stories about her workplace, how doctors looked through her as if she were invisible, how some patients treated her rudely while others showed kindness. "The worst is when the hospital administrators come through," Marisol said one morning. "They talk about me like I'm not there, even when I'm cleaning the same room they're standing in." Eleanor thought of her own company. Did the cleaning staff feel the same way? She had never considered it before. On day 8, Eleanor met James. He was in his 20s, always carried a laptop, and worked on coding during the bus ride. One day, he helped an older passenger figure out a smartphone problem. "You're good with technology," Eleanor commented afterward. James laughed. "I should be. I've been coding since I was 13. They began talking regularly. James was brilliant, Eleanor realized. He had taught himself programming and built impressive applications, but he couldn't get hired at major tech companies like hers. "I need a computer science degree for them to even look at my application," James explained. "But I can't afford college, and anyway, I already know most of what they teach me." Eleanor thought about her company's hiring practices. They'd automatically filtered out applications without college degrees. How many talented people like James had they missed? By the end of the second week, Eleanor had made several bus friends. Besides Marisol and James, there was Mr. Chen, a retired teacher who gave free math lessons to neighborhood kids. There was Danielle, a single mother studying to be a nurse while working full-time. There was Ray, a veteran who helped other veterans navigate the complicated benefits system. These people formed a loose community. They saved seats for each other. They shared snacks and stories. They watched out for one another. "You're different from when you first started riding with us," Marisol told Eleanor on day 12. "You seemed so nervous before. Now you belong." Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. She did feel like she belonged, more than she sometimes felt in her executive meetings. These people had accepted her without knowing her title or bank account balance. That night, Eleanor wrote in her journal, "I came to study bias, but I'm finding community instead. These people have skills, knowledge, and talents that my company would never discover because we don't look in the right places. We create barriers without realizing it. When I go back to my real life, how could I bring these worlds together?" She didn't know yet, but the answer would come soon. Hashtag. 12 days into her experiment, Eleanor arrived at the bus stop in the rain. Her cheap shoes leaked water, and her jacket didn't keep her dry anymore. For the first time, she wasn't just playing a role. She was actually feeling the discomfort of standing in the rain without proper protection. The 7:15 bus pulled up right on time. Eleanor recognized the driver, a man named Frank who had been driving this route for 3 days now. Frank was different from other drivers she had observed. He greeted each person differently based on how they looked. Eleanor watched carefully as people boarded. Frank smiled warmly at well-dressed passengers, chatting with some about the weather. When Marisol got on in her cleaning uniform, Frank barely looked up. When James boarded with his worn backpack, Frank didn't respond to his greeting. Eleanor got on last, nodding at Frank. He glanced at her wet clothes and mumbled something about dripping all over my clean floor. The bus was crowded today. Eleanor stood, holding onto a rail. Near the front, an elderly woman with a cane was trying to ask Frank something, but he kept ignoring her. The woman's voice was soft, and Frank turned up the radio. "Excuse me," the elderly woman said again. "Could you please tell me when we reach Pine Street? I'm not familiar with this area." Frank sighed loudly. "It's on the route map, ma'am." He didn't look at her. The woman tried again. "I'm sorry, but I can't read the small print on the map. My eyes aren't good." "I'm driving," Frank said sharply. "I can't be your tour guide." Eleanor felt her face growing hot. For almost 2 weeks, she had watched, listened, and learned. She had seen patterns of disrespect and bias. But something about the dismissive way Frank treated this elderly woman broke something inside her. Before she could think about her disguise or her experiment, Eleanor moved to the front of the bus. "She just needs to know when we reach Pine Street," Eleanor said, her voice clear and commanding. "It would take you 5 seconds to help her." Frank looked startled. Passengers looked up from their phones. This wasn't how bus interactions usually went. "Mind your own business," Frank said, but he sounded less confident. "Helping each other is everyone's business," Eleanor replied. She turned to the elderly woman. "I know where Pine Street is. I'll make sure you get off at the right stop." The woman thanked her. Eleanor stayed at the front, standing near her. She felt eyes on her back, but she didn't care anymore. When they reached Pine Street 10 minutes later, Eleanor helped the woman off the bus. Frank watched in the mirror, his face unreadable. "Thank you, dear," the woman said. "I'm visiting my daughter. She just had surgery and needs help. I couldn't miss the stop." Eleanor nodded. "I hope she feels better soon." As the bus pulled away, Eleanor remained at the stop with the woman until she saw which direction she needed to go. The experiment, her disguise, her role as an observer, all of it had momentarily disappeared. She was simply a human helping another human. That night in her luxury apartment, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Frank, about the elderly woman, about all the small moments of dismissal and disrespect she had witnessed. "The problem isn't just individual people being rude," she wrote in her journal. "It's that we built a society where some people feel entitled to respect while others are expected to be invisible. I've been part of that system. My company has been part of it too." Eleanor stared at the ceiling for hours. Tomorrow would be day 13 of her planned 2-week experiment, but she already knew what she needed to do next. It wasn't enough to observe the problem anymore. She needed to start fixing it, beginning with her own company. Eleanor arrived at Horizon Tower at precisely 8:00 a.m. on Monday morning. For the first time in 2 weeks, she wore her designer suit and heels. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. As she walked through the lobby, security guards nodded respectfully. The receptionist smiled broadly. "Welcome back, Ms. Reeves. How was your special project?" Eleanor paused, thinking of rain-soaked bus stops and dismissive glances. "Educational," she replied simply. In the elevator, Eleanor felt strange. The quiet luxury, the soft music, the feeling of being important. It all seemed foreign now. When the doors opened on the executive floor, her assistant rushed forward. "Ms. Reeves, we missed you. The board has been asking about your project. They're eager to hear what you've been working on." Eleanor nodded. "Call an emergency leadership meeting for 10:00 a.m. All department heads must attend." For the next hour, Eleanor sat in her office preparing her presentation. She had originally planned to spend another 2 days as a bus passenger, but after the incident with the elderly woman, she knew she couldn't wait any longer to act. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, Eleanor walked into the conference room. 12 executives sat around the polished table, all in expensive suits, all looking curiously at her. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Eleanor began. She didn't smile. For the past 2 weeks, I've been conducting research on social bias in our community. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of a bus stop in the rain. The executives looked confused. I disguised myself as an ordinary bus passenger, Eleanor continued. I changed my appearance, my clothes, my way of speaking. I wanted to understand how people are treated when they don't have power or status. The room grew very quiet. Some executives looked uncomfortable. Others leaned forward with interest. For the next 30 minutes, Eleanor shared her findings. She told them about Marisol, who worked 3 jobs but was treated as invisible. She told them about James, whose brilliant coding skills were wasted because he lacked a degree. She described the patterns of disrespect, the assumptions people made based on appearance, the small cruelties that happened every day. "But what does this have to do with our business?" asked Marcus, the marketing director. Eleanor fixed him with a steady gaze. "Everything. We claim to value diversity and inclusion, but our hiring practices exclude talented people like James. We say we respect all workers, but our cleaning staff is treated the same way Marisol is treated at the hospital. We believe we're creating an equal society, but we're reinforcing the very biases I experienced on those buses." Several executives shifted in their seats. Some looked defensive. Howard, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Eleanor, these sound like isolated incidents. We can't change our entire company based on a few bus rides." Eleanor recognized the dismissive tone. It was exactly how Frank, the bus driver, had spoken to the elderly woman. "These aren't isolated incidents, Howard. They're patterns. And they exist in this company too." She clicked to her final slide, a list of proposed changes. "Starting today, we're implementing these reforms." The list was bold. Blind resume screening to remove bias in hiring, mentorship programs for promising candidates without traditional credentials, mandatory bias training for all employees, partnering with community organizations to create pathways to employment. Some executives protested. Others sat in thoughtful silence. By the end of the meeting, Eleanor had won enough support to move forward with her plan. As the executives filed out, Eleanor's assistant approached her. "Miss Reeves, your car is waiting to take you to lunch." Eleanor shook her head. "Cancel the car. I'll be taking the bus." She had one more task to complete before her experiment was truly over. She needed to find her bus friends and tell them the truth about who she was and how they had changed her company forever. 6 months after her bus experiment, Eleanor Reeves stood at the same bus stop where her journey had begun. This time, she wore her executive clothes openly, a simple but elegant business suit. She wasn't hiding anymore. The 7:15 bus pulled up on time. Eleanor smiled as she recognized the driver, not Frank, but Darius, a kind man who greeted every passenger the same way regardless of their appearance. "Morning, Ms. Reeves," Darius said. Many of the drivers knew her name now. "Good morning, Darius. How's your son doing with those college applications?" "Great. Thanks to that scholarship program your company started, he's applying to 5 schools." Eleanor nodded and moved to her usual seat. So much had changed in 6 months. After revealing her true identity to her bus friends, Eleanor had faced mixed reactions. Marisol had laughed in disbelief. James had been angry at first, feeling tricked. But when Eleanor explained what she was doing with the information she gathered, their doubts turned to hope. TechVision Enterprises had transformed under Eleanor's new policies. The blind resume screening process had already discovered 3 brilliant programmers without college degrees, including James, who now led a development team. Marisol still worked at the hospital, but also served as a paid consultant for Eleanor's company, training managers on how to create truly inclusive workplaces. The company had partnered with the City Transportation Authority to improve bus safety and service. New signs on every bus clearly stated that harassment would not be tolerated. Bus drivers received training on treating all passengers with respect. "Ms. Reeves," a voice called from across the bus. It was Mr. Chen, the retired teacher. "The math program for neighborhood kids is working wonderfully. 20 students attended last week. TechVision now funded free coding and math classes taught by Mr. Chen in community centers near bus routes. 5 students had already received internships at the company." As the bus made its way downtown, Eleanor looked around at the other passengers. Some she knew from her experiment days. Others were new faces. All were treated with the same respect by Darius and by each other. At her stop, Eleanor got off and walked 2 blocks to Horizon Tower. Instead of using the executive entrance, she went through the main doors, nodding to security guards and maintenance workers by name. In the lobby, she stopped to chat with Rosa, who cleaned the first floor. Before the experiment, Eleanor had barely noticed the cleaning staff. Now she knew Rosa was working toward her GED with help from TechVision's education program. Upstairs in her office, Eleanor reviewed the latest company reports. Employee satisfaction was up 37%. Applications from diverse candidates had increased by 68%. Even profits had grown as new perspectives brought fresh ideas. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Reeves, your 10 o'clock meeting is ready." Eleanor walked into the conference room. Around the table sat her original bus friends, Marisol, James, Mr. Chen, Lisa, and others, alongside company executives. This monthly meeting brought together voices that would never have been heard in this room before. "Let's begin," Eleanor said. "Today we're discussing our new community engagement program." As the meeting progressed, Eleanor thought about how far they had come. One simple experiment had created ripples of change throughout the company and community. That evening, Eleanor rode the bus home. A young woman got on, looking nervous in a new office outfit, much like Lisa had looked 6 months ago. A man moved to sit beside her, but before he could say anything inappropriate, 3 regular passengers shifted positions, creating a protected space around the young woman. Eleanor smiled. The bus wasn't just transportation anymore. It had become a community where people looked out for each other, exactly the kind of community she was working to build everywhere. Her experiment had ended, but its effects would continue growing for years to come.